We start chapter 13 of John, this episode in 10-minute Bible study, where we are studying the Gospel of John in 10-minute, easily digestible bites, 5 times a week. Jesus' public ministry is over by the time we get to John 13. He had engaged with the Jewish religious leaders for the last time. Most of the time now will be spent during what has been called his farewell addresses to his disciples. A few words might be said to those who capture Jesus. Another few words will be said to those who are persecuting or prosecuting him. But for the most part, his speech and the things he says, his ministry is going to be said just for his disciples. But gradually, we're going to be seeing less and less of Jesus speaking publicly as he becomes that lamb who's silent before his shears, who doesn't open his mouth. It's always good to study a book of the Bible as a whole, as we've been doing, because when you begin to see it as a whole, it becomes more of a revelation to you, I would say. I've taught the book of John now. This is, I think, my 3rd time through it since I've been a pastor. And this time, I was smacked in the head by a part of John that I hadn't really paid attention before. A large part of Jesus' ministry was about him arguing with the Jews. Now, people in our day are horrified by such a thing as this, that Jesus would be involved in so many arguments, because everybody knows that arguments are always bad. Yet, almost whenever Jesus went and wherever he met, people would fiercely argue with him and wanted to kill him sometimes. But Jesus, he didn't mind. He had no concept of political correctness. He would not acquiesce to the angry voices that threatened him and rejected the life-giving message that he brought. Jesus was all truth all the time. Now recall how fascinating and empowering the evil one made sin sound to Adam and Eve. And he's continued to do that for centuries. Just as the demons raged at Jesus when he called them out, the lies that people are living under will cause them to rage out whenever they hear the truth about Jesus and in time. Now, early in John, we have Jesus explain why all these arguments happen. He says in John 3:19, Jesus said, "And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light, because their deeds were evil." People don't like the light. People don't like to tell themselves the truth. In this fallen world run by the Prince of Peace, lies are the modus operandi. It's the thing that we operate on. It's the same today. We who stand with Jesus and the light will not always be appreciated. In fact, we might also be hated and be told to shut up, while we understand that true peace comes from hearing the truth of the gospel and admitting that you need it and knowing Christ. Satan insists that peace comes by maintaining his illusory world of lies. We find that a lot more and more in our day. People are making lies about who they are and what they are, and we're supposed to all fall in line and help them maintain that illusion. I don't very much like doing that. True peace comes when we start telling ourselves the truth, when we tell ourselves that we are sinners, tell ourselves that what we're doing is errant, and then trust in God's forgiveness, and the freedom and peace comes then. There will be strong reactions against the light that brings us joy, because the sinful world is diametrically opposed to the light. Men love darkness. Now, does this mean that we should hide our light under a bushel? By no means. We should wear the full armor of God and get strong and take our stand where the stand needs to be taken. We should be that city on the hill. There are many people who are presently living in darkness, and they need to be released. And we are the ones called to do this, And quite frankly, this is how God's rescuing work is done, through engaging people, through talking to people, sharing with them the words of God's truth about his love, the truth about ourselves. That means as we do this, as we talk to people, although we have to speak the truth in love. What does that mean? Well, it means that your intentions must always be to help someone, to see them as a fellow victim of Satan, as we all are. We should truly love someone, and rather than trying to hurt them or prove ourselves right, we're trying to help them discover the truth. And sometimes, as we do this, in the process, there will be an argument. A friendly argument, I hope, but it could also be a not-so-friendly argument, like we saw with Jesus sometimes. John has so many examples of Jesus arguing with those who do not believe or want to believe, struggling to believe, and so do we. That's what we do. Think about it. Every Sunday, you come to church and you hear a sermon, which is a carefully, biblically based argument to, for example, trust the Lord more, or to pray more often, or what have you. It's possible, therefore, to present an argument without anger. He did that with Nicodemus. Remember, Nicodemus didn't understand very much, and yet Jesus very gently and calmly argued with him and brought him to see the truth. Same thing with the woman at the well. She came out with guns a-blazing when she found out that he was a Jew and she was a Gentile or a Samaritan. And yet Jesus calmly pursued and corrected her and made his argument before them, and she argued with him. Ultimately, she came to faith. We see the thing is that what Satan has done to people is he's twisted their thought processes and grabbed hold of their minds in such a way that the only way that we can get to them is to help them unpack and extricate with the truth. And if that's part of the whole process, people will argue with God because they're controlled or sometimes bewitched by Satan, and they will argue with people of God as well. This is to be expected. Enough said on that. On to the 13th chapter of John. With this chapter, we are instantly transported to the upper room on the night that Jesus was betrayed. And you'd expect John at this point to tell us all about the Lord's Supper, but he doesn't. In fact, in the whole Gospel of John, he doesn't talk about the Lord's Supper at all. Matthew, Mark, and Luke talk about the Lord's Supper, but John doesn't. Now, a lot of people freak out at that because the Lord's Supper is kind of important. You would think that John would, say, hey, I better talk about the Lord's Supper because that's a really important thing, and that's what all the Christians are doing now. Certainly, there must be something wrong with John's Gospel if he doesn't talk about this. And some people maybe might say that the Lord's Supper wasn't really instituted, and John didn't include it because he didn't think it should be. Well, no. John never set out to give us a complete list of all the things that Jesus ever said and did. We are mistaken to think that he did that. John states his objective very clearly near the end of the book. He says, "These things were written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, and that by believing in his name you can have life." Most Bible scholars have come to understand that the Gospel of John was the last of the Gospels to be written. What that means is that when John wrote his Gospel, the other Gospels, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, were in extent. They were there. He saw that they told him about that those guys had told us about the Lord's Supper, and he decided to talk about some other things, and instead other things that happened in the upper room, and fill in the gaps. And think about how John handled, for example, the birth of Christ. Matthew and Luke go into great detail about Bethlehem, Mary, Joseph, and all that stuff. John, and they tell us his genealogies, but not John. John doesn't do that. He tells us the meaning of Christ coming into the world, The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So perhaps that's the way the last chapter, or that's how John is for this example, for the Lord's Supper. He's going to tell us about the meaning of what happened in the upper room. So what other things happened in the upper room? Well, foot washing, for one. The other Gospels don't talk about that. Next time, we'll dip our toe into that.